What's up, everyone? I'm Travis, and I'm going to go over the three main movements that we're going to use in our dump truck program. Now, these are going to be with the barbell. You can forget about the bands, you can forget about the body weight movements. These three movements are going to target your glutes the most. So they're going to be single leg movements to get more glute activation, and we're going to start it off with the rear foot elevated split squat. So the first one is a rear foot elevated split squat. All you're going to need is a bar and then a bench or a box that's around 15 inches high. It could be a little more or a little less. So what you're going to do for the setup, you want to make it the same. You can take your calves, touch them to the bench. You're then going to take 3 steps. So 1, 2, 3. I'm going to put my back foot on the bench. Now this setup will work for 90% of people. It won't work for everybody. You might bump your foot a little farther forward, but the 3 steps is going to work for most people. So your back foot, you can either be up on the toe or you can have your ankle on the edge. I like my ankle to be on the edge. So from the rack, I'll take the bar to my back. I'll take my 3 steps. Okay, so some key things we're looking for is when we're squatting, we want to get to the right depth. So the right depth is going to be hip crease in line with our knee, even slightly below. And then we want the foot to remain fully in contact with the floor as I stand. I'm standing through my heel. I'll be looking straight ahead to help keep my chest up and just really emphasize squeezing at the top. So some common faults that we'll see is not reaching proper depth. If you're too close to the bench, it's going to make that harder. We don't want that knee to be sticking out straight over the toe with the weight in the ball of your foot. And just make sure you use a weight that's light enough that you can accumulate the reps and the depth. So these are harder than they look. So start on the lighter side. Okay, and then movement number 2 is going to be a single leg rear foot elevated Romanian deadlift. So the good news is we can use the same bench and the same bar, and our setup can look the same too. So I'm going to take 3 steps. 1, 2, 3. I'll put my back leg on the bar or on the bench. Now when I go to bend over and pick up the bar, I'm not just bending over, rounding my back and picking it up. Okay, I'm going to pick it up with a flat back, drive through my heel. And now I'm just going to hinge at the hip just below the knee. Okay guys, so the main thing, I'm standing through the front heel. That shin can be vertical, it can be angled forward a little bit. My foot position is about the same as on the split squat. I can be on the toe, I can be on the edge. I just want to make sure I'm about 3 steps. If you get too close, if you feel like your low back starts burning too much, you may be a little too close to the bench. We just don't want to turn this into more of a squat where I'm bending at the hips and my knee is jetting forward and then my bar has to go out and around the knee. So knee is slightly bent and then it's just going to be a subtle hip hinge just below the knee. So these are extremely difficult. You're going to start with a lighter weight. I know a lot of people that can deadlift a lot of weight, but then once they put 95 pounds on this, they'll struggle for 10 reps. So just take this one easy. And then movement number 3 is going to be a barbell hip thrust. So we can use the same bench, same barbell. I would recommend getting some kind of a hip thrust pad. People do complain about having these being painful because these can be loaded heavy. And so with the bar straight on your hips, it can be kind of uncomfortable. So I'd recommend getting a real hip thrust pad. This is just a foam one I had laying around. So you're going to start out, bar's going to roll to your waist. Shoulders are going to be on the bench. I'll get my feet flat. We don't want our shoulders too far back or too far forward, and you don't have to go all the way down to the floor. Otherwise, you'll probably slip off the bench. So I'm just going to have my feet about hip width, and I'm going to drive through the heels. And I'm going to pause and squeeze at the top just for a second. All right, guys, so just make sure you don't get too much weight on here, that you can't hold that pause at the top. But these are pretty straightforward. You can load them heavy. You're not going to get hurt on these. And these are an awesome exercise for really building your posterior chain. So those are our 3 main movements for the dump truck program. If you have any questions, you can hit us up on the Facebook group.